So I know firsthand how overwhelming spring can feel to the beginning flower farmer because I've been there myself. The very first year that I grew tulips, I planted a couple hundred and I thought that I was prepared. I'd spent months planning, ordering bulbs, planting carefully, everything I thought that I needed to do. But what I didn't realize, and what no one really tells you, is just how much pressure comes with spring. Everyone talks about the opportunity, how demand for flowers is at its highest, how eager people are to see color after a long winter. And that's true, spring is full of potential. But what doesn't get talked about nearly as much is the flip side of that opportunity, the pressure to catch those blooms at just the right moment. The fear of missing your harvest window. It's the worry about what it would mean if you can't sell your stems in time. It's that creeping anxiety that every tulip left too long might turn into a missed sale, and an unexpected expense that you're somehow going to have to make up later on in the year. I remember standing amongst my tulips that very first season, feeling like the clock was ticking louder with every passing hour. It wasn't just about flowers anymore. It was about trying to protect all that time, energy, and money that I'd already poured into them. That first season taught me so much, and I'm so happy to be able to share that with you here today, so that you can move into your tulip season with more confidence, with more clarity, and maybe just a little less pressure weighing on your shoulders. And even if you're not growing tulips yourself, I'm simply excited to take you behind the scenes and share a closer look at how we harvest, process, and store our tulips. I want to give you a feel for what this season really looks like on our farm. So first, let's get technical. One of the things that can make growing tulips feel so intimidating is that they're a true one-and-done type flower. Especially when tulips are grown specifically for cut flower production, they're treated as annuals. And don't worry, we'll talk more about why that is a little later on. But knowing that you only get one chance to get it right if you're planning to sell your blooms, well, that can add a lot of pressure to an already stressful situation. Now, the good news is that once you start to understand the rhythm of tulips, harvesting at the right moment, it feels less intimidating, almost like you're moving in step with the season instead of rushing to catch up. So the best time to harvest your tulips is at the kissing bud stage, when your buds are slightly colored and not yet open. At this stage, the tulips will continue to develop and open beautifully in the vase, giving your customers that longest possible vase life, about 7 to 10 days. Harvesting at this stage, it also ensures better stability during transportation, and there's less likelihood of getting petals bruised or crushed. When harvesting tulips specifically for cut flower production, like we do here at Two Sisters, I look for strong stem firmness. The bud should show good color but still feel tight. You want to catch them before the petals begin to loosen. Now, if you're worried about getting it just right, here's my encouragement to you. It's the advice that I wish I would have taken to heart myself during my very first season. And that is, don't be too hard on yourself. This ideal harvest stage is something to aim for, but it's not something to obsess over. Catching tulips at that kissing bud stage will give your customers, or yourself if you're growing for personal enjoyment, the longest vase life possible, which ultimately means more days to enjoy their beauty indoors. It's also the best stage if you plan to store your tulips for later sales. One of the best things about tulips is that if you're feeling particularly overwhelmed with blooms, is that you can store them in a cooler for weeks without affecting their later performance. It's almost like freezing them in time while you figure out a game plan for what comes next. Or it allows you to catch your breath between the harvest and the sale of your flowers. Now understand that tulips store best when harvested at this more ideal bud stage, when they still have more room to open slowly after they're pulled from cold storage. So that's why we're often so focused on that kissing bud stage. I want you to understand though, not all is lost if your blooms ripen a little more than you intended. Working with Mother Nature is a humbling experience. And as much as we try, there are always variables that we can't fully control. Sometimes a sudden stretch of warm weather pushes flowers to bloom earlier than expected. Sometimes, despite your best planning, you simply can't catch everything at that perfect moment. And that's why I always make sure to have a backup plan for blooms that I might not have caught at the ideal harvest stage. Now, I'll be sharing more about what I do in those situations a little later on in this video, so keep watching. Here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, we harvest tulips by gently pulling the ready-to-harvest flowers from their crates, bulb and all. This method is fast, efficient, and works well for us since the soil we grow in is relatively loose and easy to work. Harvesting the tulip with a bulb attached ensures that we get the longest stem length possible, which is especially important when you're selling to customers or designing bouquets. It also allows us to reuse the soil in our crates for other summer crops, so we choose to replant after tulip season wraps up. If you're growing tulips in the ground where the soil is more compacted, you may find that the flowers don't loosen quite as easily as they do in our crate-grown system. If that's the case for you, don't worry, there are a couple of easy options here. For starters, you can gently loosen the bulbs with a pitchfork by wedging it underneath the roots to break up the soil. Or you can simply cut the stems at ground level, just like you would harvest a traditional cut flower. In this clip here from a few years ago, you'll see me cutting the tulips at their base, which felt much more natural when I was just getting started. Over time, as I've gained more experience, I transitioned to pulling the tulips bulb and all. For me, it took some practice to build that skill, but now that I have, it's made the harvesting process much faster and more efficient. Let me be clear, both methods can be just as successful. It really comes down to what's most efficient for you and what you feel most comfortable with. So this is a good lead up to one of the most common questions that we often hear in reference to growing tulips. And that is, do tulips perennialize? Will they come back year after year? And the answer is, well, sometimes. Under the right conditions, tulips can return for several seasons. If you're growing tulips for your own landscape or personal garden, and you're willing to leave the foliage intact after blooming, it is possible to encourage the bulbs to recharge through photosynthesis and bloom again the following year. Just keep in mind that even under ideal conditions, tulips often produce smaller or less impressive blooms in their second and third years. When you're growing tulips for flower production though, things look a little bit different. Because long, strong stems are the goal, and because harvesting often removes much of the foliage needed for regeneration, most flower farmers treat tulips as annuals, replanting fresh bulbs each fall. It's also important to know that not all tulip varieties perennialize equally well. Among the most reliable types for perennial gardens are the Darwin hybrid tulips, known for their strength and their consistency over multiple seasons. So if having your tulips return year after year is important to you, I encourage you to be a little bit more intentional when choosing your tulip varieties. Look for those that are known to perennialize well. It can make all the difference creating a spring garden that grows even more beautiful with time. So now that we know that tulips are typically treated as annuals in the cut flower world, well, it makes sense to harvest in a way that gives you the most from each stem. That's why many flower farmers harvest tulips with a bulb attached whenever possible. Pulling the tulip bulb and all not only gives you that longest possible stem length, but it also has advantages when it comes to storage, which we'll talk about more in depth later on. But the bulb continues to feed and hydrate the flower even after harvest, extending the vase life and allowing the blooms to hold beautifully in cold storage for days or even weeks. So when you're ready to sell, you simply trim off the bulb at the base, giving you a clean, long stem ready for arranging or bundling. So let's dive deeper into how to store tulips after harvest. One of the best things about tulips is that with the right timing, you can stretch their season a little longer, giving yourself some breathing room when your crates or your fields are overflowing with blooms. Like with a lot of the steps of this tulip harvesting process that I've already shared, how you store tulips after harvest is really dependent on your personal circumstances and preferences. Now, in the cut flower world, it's sort of industry standard to store tulips between 37 and 39 degrees Fahrenheit with a bulb still attached. A lot of flower farmers will actually harvest their tulips into an empty bulb crate or even a cardboard box, using sticks across the front to keep the flowers securely inside, and then they'll store the full crates upright in a cooler until they're needed. Now, there's no need for water. The tulips will dry store this way just fine. Now, this process is still perfectly acceptable. I'm not trying to allude to you that it's not. But with continuing research on flower performance during storage, some farmers are finding that tulips can actually handle even cooler temperatures. For optimal storage, a temperature range of 32 to 35 degrees is now more often recommended. For some flower farmers who aren't working with a commercial cooler, well, this temperature may be harder to maintain, and honestly, that's all right. You don't have to do everything perfectly to get a beautiful product to market. But I do think that it's important for you to understand the full process, because the more you know about what helps tulips look their best, well, the more confident and flexible you can be in adjusting to whatever resources that you have available. Now, you can also store tulips without the bulb on, which I'll point out is great for shorter term storage. You see, the benefits of leaving the bulb on, which we talked about earlier, those benefits are most often seen in long-term storage, meaning 2 weeks or more. Short-term storage, 2 weeks or less, which is often how long we hold tulips here, well, those benefits are less noticeable. So like I said, you can store your tulips off the bulb. And when you do this, you have two main options. You can store them in water or dry, just like you would if the bulb were still attached. Here at Two Sisters Flower Farm, where I don't have a floral cooler, and I'm often tucking tulip bunches into the open spaces of my refrigerator, I personally prefer to store my tulips off the bulb because it's less bulky that way, but I will still place them in water during storage. Now, if you prefer, you can dry store your tulips as well, and it can be a good option if you have your selling schedule carefully mapped out. That's because dry storing tulips requires that you rehydrate them after pulling them out of storage, and well, this process can take a little bit of time. As a small-scale grower where last-minute customer requests pop up fairly often, I find it more flexible to have my tulips already hydrated and ready to go. So having tulips stored in water means that I can give the stems a fresh snip and send them out the door immediately without waiting for the flowers to rehydrate after dry storage. It's a small adjustment, but has made a big difference in being able to respond quickly and confidently during a busy spring season. When you're ready to sell your tulips, a little processing is all it takes to have your stems ready for their new home. Now, no matter how you've stored your tulips, dry or in water, anytime that I'm pulling flowers out of storage to sell, I always give the stems a fresh cut. If the bulb is still attached at this point, this is where I'll cut it off and compost it. Now, tulips don't tend to have a lot of foliage compared to other flowers, but some varieties do have more leaves than others. While I like to leave some of that foliage attached to make my tulip bouquets feel fuller, any leaves that are low on the stem, the ones that would sit below the water line, I will remove those before rubber banding my bunches together. And when it comes time to bundle, I usually group tulips into an 8 or 10 stem bunch. Now, notice here how I'm aligning the tulip heads, not the bottoms of the stems, when I arrange them into a bunch. And that's because I want all the blooms to sit on the same plane, creating a uniform and polished appearance. Don't worry if the stems are uneven, because once the bunch is complete, I'll give the stems a fresh trim so the bottoms are roughly the same length. and then I place my stems into a craft paper sleeve that is appropriately sized for the bundle. Choosing the right size sleeve is key at this point. Too big and your bunch can look sparse, and too small and your flowers get squished. So I'll carefully align all the tulip heads and then slide the stems into the sleeve so the tops sit about an inch below the edge of the sleeve. Not so deep that they get hidden, but not so shallow that they risk damage. You see, tulips have this special quirk. Even after harvest, they continue to stretch and elongate their stems in the vase. So by placing the blooms slightly below the sleeve line, I'm being mindful of that natural movement, protecting the flowers and making sure they travel safely to their customers' homes. So by now, you've seen our full tulip process, but I still want to touch on a few other things, like how to extend your tulip season. You see, if you don't have access to a cooler or you're just working with limited space and resources, I don't want you to worry, because there's still plenty of creative ways to extend your tulip season so that everything doesn't bloom all at once. Now, some of these methods that we're going to talk about, they might only buy you a few extra days, and others might give you a little bit more breathing room. Either way, I think it's important to know your options. Especially during those moments when the season feels like it's moving faster than you can keep up with. Having a tulip season for your farm, it's not about doing everything the right way. You see, it's about choosing the options that make the most sense for you and finding small, steady ways to create a little bit more space, a little bit more joy, and a little bit more manageability into the middle of a busy spring season. Now, here are a few ways that you can do that. The first way is to create microclimates within your farm. If you have different spaces available to you, such as tunnels or covered beds, or even slightly protected corners of your garden, you can create microclimates that naturally stagger your bloom times. Tulips that are planted under cover, like a low tunnel or a hoop house, often warm up faster, leading to earlier blooming. Meanwhile, tulips planted fully outside, exposed to those colder temperatures for longer, will naturally take more time to break dormancy and bloom. This method, it's a simple way to use the environment to your advantage without really needing any other special equipment than what you already have on hand. Now, option 2 is to grow a range of early, mid, and late season tulip varieties. Choosing a mix of tulip varieties with different bloom windows, early, mid, and late, it can help gently spread your harvest across a few extra weeks. Now, it may not buy you a huge amount of extra time, but sometimes just a little bit of breathing room can make a big difference when you're feeling overwhelmed. This small adjustment can help you avoid the stress of everything coming into peak all at once and give you more manageable waves of beauty instead. Your next option is to use cold storage. Now, I know we already talked about this, but if you don't have access to a full walk-in floral cooler just yet, don't worry. Sometimes even a standard household refrigerator can be a stand-in for when you're in a crunch. Now, your refrigerator might not offer the same amount of space or drop to that same low temperature as a commercial cooler, but it can still be a much better option than simply letting your blooms sit out in the warmth of your house or your garage or barn or whatever. If you find yourself buried under blooms and needing a little extra time, even having one fridge shelf cleared off can give you just enough flexibility to catch your breath and strategize your next move. Now, a more advanced option would be to experiment with forcing tulips. Like I said, this option's a little bit more technical, but it's actually how we manage our tulip season here at Two Sisters Flower Farm. We're fortunate that here in West Michigan, and specifically in the old Michigan basement of our farmhouse, now if you're not familiar with what a Michigan basement is, look it up. It's honestly never something that I thought I'd be grateful for, but it provides the perfect ambient temperatures needed to bring tulips into bloom during the dead of winter without any supplemental heat. By forcing tulips indoors in bulb crates and staggering our planting successions, we're able to extend our tulip season for 3 to 4 months. Instead of having 12,000 tulips bloom all at once outdoors, we typically have about 1,000 tulips blooming each week for 12 weeks, significantly reducing the number of customers that we need at once to move our flowers and allowing us to create a much more steady, sustainable season. Now, it's a bit more planning up front, but it's one of the best decisions that we've made for our spring operation. You can find plenty of information on tulip forcing from various sources on the internet. We actually took the Tulip Workshop, which is an online workshop on tulip forcing. We took that a few years back, and it truly gave me the confidence to force tulips on a larger basis. So I encourage you to check that course out if you're serious about tulip forcing. Okay, so with all this information on how our tulip season runs, my goal is not to overwhelm you. I simply want to show you that building a tulip season on your farm, no matter the scale, is about finding small, sustainable strategies that help you capture more of spring's momentum without burning out. Now, before this video gets too long, let's briefly discuss how to make the most out of tulips that ripen faster than you expect. The reality is that even with the best timing and planning, sometimes blooms get ahead of you. I want you to know that that is okay. And while most don't admit to it, it's completely normal too. So here are a few of my favorite tips for how to make the most of your tulips, no matter where they are in their stage of bloom. For starters, you can include some more open blooms in your bunches. You see, if a tulip is a little bit more colored up than ideal, but still closed, I'll often mix it into my regular tulip bunches. Those slightly more mature blooms actually help customers. They give them a reference point for what the tighter buds will eventually look like. I actually learned this early on in my flower farming journey. One of the very first years that I sold tulips, I signed up to be part of a local spring vendor market. I brought along all of my wrapped bunches of tulips in their crisp craft paper sleeves, carefully bundled and still fairly tight. And just for fun, I also brought a vase of tulips that I had harvested for myself a few days earlier, and I had been enjoying them in my kitchen. I'll never forget their reactions. The tulips in the vase, which were a bright doubled variety called Mary Jo, they were fully open and absolutely stunning. All day long, the shoppers, they stopped to admire them, and many couldn't believe that the open, lush blooms sitting in that vase were the same tulips tucked tightly into the bunches that I was selling. A few people thought that I had brought along peonies or roses with me. That day, it taught me something very important. It's the fact that most customers don't have the same frame of reference that we do as growers. They haven't seen the catalog pictures. They truly don't know what magic is waiting inside those tight buds. So by including a few more colored up blooms, or simply showing an open example nearby, you help bridge that gap. And in doing so, you invite them to enjoy the full beauty of what you've grown. Now, another option is to use fully open blooms to build your photo library. For the longest time, I resisted the idea of creating a photo library. In the early days of flower farming, I was always in a rush, trying to get flowers to customers as fast as possible to preserve their vase life, and honestly, just trying to keep my head above water most of the time. I was balancing flower farming with working a full-time job, squeezing farm tasks into early mornings and late nights. Not exactly ideal lighting for photos. Plus, I was working alone and trying to capture trending arm-load pictures with a photo timer, well, that often left me frustrated and just ready to give up. Taking good photos felt like a luxury I didn't have time for. But then one winter, while I was shopping for dahlia tubers of all things, I stumbled across a small flower farmer's website. They had photos for each dahlia variety, but the images were captured in harsh lighting with cluttered backgrounds, and they really didn't do the flowers justice. Now, I am by no means judging. I get it. I've been there myself. Capturing good quality photos isn't a skill that comes naturally to a lot of people. It's something that I've really had to work on over the years. But as a customer scrolling those images, I realized something important. If I hadn't already known those dahlia varieties from previous experience, I probably wouldn't have felt confident enough to buy. In that moment, something clicked for me. Product photos aren't about creating these perfectly styled and curated images. They're about building trust. They help customers truly understand what they're buying and what they can expect. A customer who can't see your flowers clearly, who feels a disconnect between what they imagine and what you're actually offering, is much less likely to make a purchase. That's why today I use fully open blooms, the ones that aren't quite ideal for selling, to slowly and steadily build a photo library that reflects the real beauty of our farm. It's not about perfection. It's about helping customers believe in what you're growing. Lastly, you can gift open blooms to build a bit of goodwill. sometimes the best thing you can do with more open blooms is to simply spread a little bit of joy. A couple years ago, we had an unusually warm spring, and the tulips came on much faster than we could keep up with. Rather than let the flowers go to waste, I remember I bunched up the ones that were too open to sell, and I posted on social media that they were free for the taking. Every single bunch found a home that day. And even better, some of the people who came to pick up those free tulips, well, they became loyal customers the following season. They experienced firsthand the beauty and uniqueness of our flowers, something they might never have discovered otherwise, and it led to a sale. Now, in the short term, offering those flowers for free, it felt like a small loss. But looking back, it was a strategic investment in building community and in growing trust and excitement around what we have to offer. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Spring moves fast, sometimes faster than you feel ready for. And when you're standing amongst your tulips, trying to keep up with the season's pace, it's easy to feel like every decision has to be perfect. But flower farming, like so much of life, isn't about getting everything right. It's about learning to move with a rhythm, to see possibility even when things don't go exactly as planned. It's about trusting that every choice you make, every harvest, every photo snapped, every bunch given away freely, is planting seeds for something bigger down the road. So if you find yourself worrying about a missed harvest window or blooms that have opened too soon, take a breath. There's still beauty to be found. There's still meaning in the moment, and the work you're doing, even the messy, the imperfect parts, it's building something that will outlast the season. If tulip season has you feeling a little frazzled right now, don't worry, you're not alone, and you're not stuck there either. You see, in our next video, which we'll be releasing later this week, I'll be sharing the spring flower that reminds me most of the importance of slowing down. So hit that subscribe button if you'd like to be notified of when that video goes live. In the meantime, if you're looking for more spring inspiration, I think you'll love this post here, how growing specialty daffodils helped us grow our flower farm's spring season. I hope you'll check it out because I can't wait to see you there. Bye guys.